Today, I want to show you how to create a smart deadline formula inside of Notion. So what this formula is going to do is essentially take a deadline property, and we'll only be using two different properties. I wanted to make sure this formula is something you could use inside of a database you already have. So those two properties are going to be a date property, which I have labeled deadline, and a checkbox property I've labeled done. So what this formula is going to do is if your deadline is in the past, it's going to return overdue. If it's due today, then it will return due today. If it is due tomorrow, it will return the words due tomorrow. If it is due within the coming week, it will return that it's due in the coming week and the exact weekday it is due. And then in the false condition, we'll have all of the upcoming dates that are after 1 week and the number of days until the deadline. That's essentially the entire formula. We're also going to include that checkbox to override all of the dates if the task is done. Let's just get right into building this thing. So this is a little snippet of my tasks database when I go in and start working on my content for my blog. And the way I do this is pretty straightforward. I have my deadline, I have some tags. Let me just put this into a full page. I have popularity. This is basically just a rating system to see how popular the post was. I have a checkbox for done. I have a checkbox for Twitter. Did I post to Twitter? Some extra, sometimes I put in my blog a little extra piece at the bottom of the article that's like an extra tip that's related to the article. And that's pretty much it. What I want to do here is just work with two different properties, like I said. I'm going to work with the deadline property, which is just a date property. So if you have a date property and a checkbox property, I'm just using those two properties to create this formula. Now, ordinarily in the past, I have used a separate checkbox to archive a task, to put inside a completely different database view so I don't have to see it anymore. Or I'll make a database view that collects all of my tasks that are done. So whenever I click that done checkbox, it disappears. And I don't really like that. I like seeing all of my tasks checked off. So what I did is I created another condition. So let's say this is done, but I did it on Thursday, so 2 days ago. It will tell me archive. And this will automatically go into an archive database view without me clicking anything. So that's more of a visual preference for me personally. The first thing I want to do is I want to create the archived condition because I want this to override everything. So with formulas, whenever you do a list of conditions, a list of if statements, you're going to make sure the one at the top is the one that overrides everything else. If we want to find if a date is a certain number of days in the past, we're going to use the date between function. I'll show you how this works. So it's going to be date between the deadline and right now. And now is written as now in 2 parentheses, comma, and I want to see the number of days between them. You'll find here that March 5th is -1 days away because it's yesterday. If it were the 4th, it would be -2 days away. So what I want is anything before -1. So I want to say if date between is less than -1, if it is -1 and the property is done. Because if it is not done, then that means it's overdue. Past, then I want it to say archive. So I'm just going to copy this over here, paste it in. For right now, let's put in a false condition, otherwise empty space. If I were to change the deadline to Thursday, it should say archive. And I have a database view called archive, where all of this goes into, and the filter is called action, ends with archive. Now let's move on to the next condition. So let's copy and paste this over so you guys can see this, and all of this will be linked down below. The next one is, let's delete this false condition. Let's say if property done equals true. So simply if it is ticked, but the above does not apply, I need it to say done with a star. Let's copy this. Let's put in that false condition to just see if this works. I'm going to close that with 2 parentheses because there are 2 if statements. And if I were to put that it was yesterday that I finished it, it should say done. Today, it should say done, and so on. But if it was the 4th, it should say archive. All right, cool. The next thing I want to see is if the deadline is today, then return due today. So this one's a little bit tricky, and I'm gonna use another formula to show you how this works. Let's make sure the deadline says today. And naturally, you kind of want to do something like this. Prop deadline equals now. But the problem with this, you'll see that it is unchecked. So it does not believe it is today. That is because the now function actually returns the time. So if I'm trying to tell my database, does it equal? Well, it doesn't because it's not formatted equally. So first I need to format now. Say format date now to match my deadline, and I'm going to format it to match how my deadline looks. And I'm doing that with format date. Oops, put too many Y's. Now it does match. So if format date now is equal to format date deadline in the same fashion, then it will check if it's today. And now if I put in yesterday, it will be unchecked. I put in tomorrow, it will be unchecked. So that's how you're getting if something is today. And I want to turn this into an if statement up in our action formula. So I'm going to add it to the end here. I'm going to say if the format of now equals the format of deadline in the same way, then I want it to say due today. Put in that false condition for now to see if it works. 3 parentheses at the end because now there are 3 if statements. It should say done because checked is done, but if it's unchecked, it should say due today. So the next thing I want to do is if the deadline is in the past and that checkbox is unchecked, I want it to say overdue. This is a pretty straightforward formula. We're just going to say if deadline is less than today, return overdue. So let's delete this false condition and say if prop deadline is less than now, then overdue. And that's it. Let's see if that works. Put in 4 parentheses to close out now, and it does say overdue. If I press done, it will say archive because it's the 4th. If it were the 5th, it would just say done. If I were to unclick it, it will say overdue. So now it's starting to get more complex. Pretty much anything in the past now, if it is not done, will say overdue. Now let's see if the deadline is due tomorrow. So now we're going into the future. Going into this test formula, again, if we want to find how many days are from today and a certain date, like we did before with doing the archived condition, we're going to use date between. Date between the deadline and right now. Now another thing that I didn't mention actually. The reason why I'm saying deadline to now and not now, comma, deadline, either way it's going to return a number, but if I put the deadline's date before now, what will happen is all the dates before now will be negative numbers and all the dates after now will be positive numbers, and that's a lot easier to understand logically. So this D should not be a capital D. Days. Okay, so 0 days between now and tomorrow. This is a bit annoying. You kind of want it to say 1, but it doesn't, and the reason why is again because now has a time property. So from today to tomorrow, it is technically less than a day, unless deadline said tomorrow at 10:18 a.m. It's not too much of a problem though. 6th, it will also say 0, but again, we already have an if statement that returns today that overrides this if statement. So really the only 0 left is tomorrow. All we really have to do is say equals 0. And then we can turn this into an if statement. Going back up to action and saying if the days between equals 0, then return to me due tomorrow. Put parentheses at the end of this to close it out. Let's see if it worked. And it did. Moving on to the next one, we only have 3 left. Actually, we have 2 and then the false condition at the end. The next one I want to do is say if the deadline is within the next week, say it is due on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. So we're going to return the day of the week. We're going to use that date between function again, except this time we're going to say date between now and days. So the 8th is 1 day, the 9th is 2, 3, 4, and 5 on the 12th. And we're going to leave that 13th alone because we're actually going to use a different condition for that. So just between 1 and 5, I want to make sure date between is greater than 0. And let's just copy this, paste it, the end here, and less than or equal to 5. Say if date between deadline and now in days is greater than 0 and less than or equal to 5, I want to return this little triangle symbol and say due on and put a space after this. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the day of the week that this deadline is on. So due on blank day of the week. Let's just put an empty space there for now, and I'm going to show you how this works in the test formula. So we have due on. So to find the day of the week, simply we're going to use the format date function. Put in that property you want to format that is a date, comma, and then format it. I'm going to do 4 lowercase d's and close it out. And it'll say Friday, which March 12th is indeed a Friday. If I put the 11th, it will say Thursday. So I'm going to add this to the end of this if condition. I'm going to say plus, so due on plus, replace these quotes with that format date. You'll see up here it says due on Thursday now. Let's copy all of this over to the side so you can see it better. If date between is greater than 0 and is less than or equal to 5, say due on plus the day of the week, just formatting the date to 4 lowercase d's. All right, so the next condition is going to be if it is exactly 1 week ahead. So that's the 13th. If it is exactly 1 week ahead, I don't want it to just say due on Saturday because today's Saturday and that's confusing. I want to say due next Saturday. So we're pretty much going to do the same thing. I mean, if we go into test here and use that date between again, say property, deadline, and right now in days. And I want it to be equal to 6 this time, which should equal exactly 1 week from today. So if it is equal to 6, I want it to pretty much say the same thing. So put an if before this. If it is equal to 6, comma. I do want it to say due with this triangle here. Space. I want to format the day of the week, but instead of saying due on, I'm just going to say due next. Space after that. Place these placeholder quotes. Actually, we can copy and paste this guy over here. Format date. At the end, place these empty quotes, and it should work. Due next Saturday. Let's paste it over here so you can see it better. Doing the same thing, except I'm just saying if the date between function equals 6. So this is a little bit smaller of a statement, but pretty much saying the same exact thing. All right, now we're gonna find the false condition. So we're gonna replace this empty quotes at the end here with our final condition. And that's saying if a task is further than a week ahead, we're gonna say upcoming in blank number of days. So firstly, let's find the number of days between today and the deadline. Again, just date between prop, deadline, and now in days. So that's pretty easy to find. We already know how to do that. And then I want to turn it into a text property because we're putting other text properties around it. We're putting upcoming, and at the end I want to put the word days. We can't combine numbers and letters. You can't combine numbers and text together. So we're going to turn this number into text, and that's pretty easy. You're just going to use format. Let's make sure this deadline is more than a week ahead. So let's say the 16th, and it is 9 days ahead. You would think that the 16th is not 9 days away, since today is the 6th, it is actually 10 days away. And that's because, again, if we go to tomorrow, it returns 0. So tomorrow starts at 0. If you don't want that, I certainly don't want that, I'm just gonna add 1 at the end and then close that formatting out. So this is gonna be our number. Now around this, I wanna say upcoming the space. And at the end, I want to say days. Or I could say upcoming in the number of days. So let's just plop this right in to the end of that formula. Right here at the false condition, paste it in. And now, whenever a deadline is over a week, it'll tell me the number of days until the deadline. So upcoming in 12 days. Formula is complete. I'm going to paste it over here on the side. So let's say upcoming, see here. All right, so let's look at how all of this works and how I've filtered everything inside of my database to visualize this even better. So the first thing I have here is I actually look at my master most of the time. This is absolutely everything I want to write, any ideas I have. If you've seen my Rome video where I go and I think of ideas every morning, most of those ideas suck, but some of them are good, and I throw them into a database that looks like this. Of course, this is just a snapshot of my larger database. If you've seen my timeline video, that is sort of what's above this database here. So these connect to parent goals, essentially. But this is what I'm looking at. We have all of our action formulas shown in this list view, and then just simply a checkbox to tell me if it's done or not. This article here is super. This is my super video I forgot to put in as a written article. So I want to do that today, and when I'm done, it will say done, but it will stay here in the master view. Inside of my archive, once 2 days have passed, it will come into here. And the filter simply says action ends with archive. And here I see my ratings for popularity, archive, and the checkbox, of course, is done. And then I have another database view for the coming week, and this filter is simply deadline is within the next week, or deadline is today. And then I have another database view for everything due today. And that is it. That is my entire database view with this smart deadline formula. So one last thing, here's a little extra bit. If you're wondering how this works with a date property, that is a date range. So let's say I have an end date here for the 8th. So I want to work on this between the 6th and the 8th. If this is how you set up your task database, you can still use this formula. What you're going to do is just wrap all of your date property names with the end function. So you're just grabbing the end of that date range. And what I suggest doing, if you've already gone through this and you want to change it to a date range, press Command F and you'll get a search box at the top of your page. Hopefully you can see it in my recording. And I'm just going to highlight and copy my prop deadline anywhere in this formula and copy it because that is my date property, paste it inside of that box, and I'll see every instance that I have my prop deadline property, and I can go in and just start wrapping it with end, and wrapping another parentheses at the end there, and I'll just do this with each one. All the way down to the bottom. If you're working with really big formulas, this is also super helpful. So 2 things. First of all, I really wanted this to be usable. Like I said in the beginning, I wanted to make sure you can just plug this formula into a database you already have. But I do want to say that if you do want to do that and you don't have a date property called deadline, I would rename it to deadline before plugging this formula in. That also goes for the done property so that it matches up better and it will work. Then you can go and rename those properties back to what they were before. If you're still a little bit confused, I did put a link down below to this entire formula broken down into all the sections we went through. as well as the formula in its entirety to just copy and paste. The mockup database I use that's similar to my own tasks database will also be available to duplicate. So all those things will be down below. There will also be a Discord link to join the Discord, and there you can ask me some more specific questions for your own custom needs. And yeah, I will probably, I usually say that I'll see you on next Sunday, but I'm actually putting out another video probably the day you're watching this, if you're watching it the day I'm uploading. So I'll see you then, and I'll see you on Twitter.